You think fun is a modern invention? It isn't. Long before anyone had a job to clock out of, before weekends, before the word for boredom even existed in any language on Earth, someone was already laughing so hard they couldn't breathe. And here's the part that's going to mess with you: they weren't even human. Roll the clock back far enough and you find something strange. The stuff we do to feel alive, the games, the music, the jokes, the dancing until your legs give out, none of it started with us. We inherited it. We were born into a world that already knew how to have a good time. So the real question was never whether ancient humans had fun. They did. The question is what that fun actually looked like, how far back it really goes, and why some of the very first things our ancestors ever built were not shelters and not weapons, but parties. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you might stop seeing fun as something that happened alongside human history and start seeing it as the thing that created it. Let's start with laughter, because laughter leaves clues. Go into a lab where scientists study great apes, tickle a young chimpanzee, and it makes a sound, a breathy, panting, rhythmic sound. Do the same with a gorilla, an orangutan, a bonobo, and you get a version of the same thing. Researchers recorded all of it, mapped the sounds against each other, and found something that should stop you cold. They all trace back to one shared ancestor, a creature that lived somewhere between 10 and 16 million years ago and already knew how to laugh. Sit with that number. 16 million years. Laughter is older than the human face. And it's not just laughter. Scientists who study animal behavior treat play as a real, measurable thing, not a cute accident. Young mammals wrestle, chase, pounce, and test each other, and it wires their brains and bodies for the life ahead. It shows up across the whole animal kingdom, which means the urge to play was already deep in our bloodline millions of years before anything you would call a person walked the earth. So picture Lucy Australopithecus, 3.2 million years ago. A brain barely bigger than an ape's, a body barely taller than a child. Walking upright across ancient Africa, we have her bones. We even have a child of her kind, a little girl paleontologists nicknamed Salam, who died before she ever grew up. She had the body of an ape and the future of a human inside her. And if the science holds, she almost certainly played, chased, laughed, because her ancestors already did. Fun did not wait for us to get smart. It was standing at the starting line before we ever showed up. Now let's jump forward to where things get loud. Start with humor. The oldest recorded joke we have ever found is around 4,000 years old, written down by the Sumerians. You want to know what it is? It's a fart joke, I'm serious. The punchline is basically about a young woman doing something no proper lady is supposed to do while sitting in her husband's lap. 4,000 years ago, people carved that into clay, on purpose because they thought it was funny. The oldest joke in recorded history is a fart joke. Let that restore a little faith in your ancestors. But jokes need language, and language doesn't fossilize. Music, though, music left something behind you can hold. In a cave in southern Germany, archaeologists pulled a flute out of the ground, carved from the wing bone of a vulture drilled with finger holes actually tuned. It's around 40,000 years old, and it still plays. Somebody sat in that cave by firelight in the middle of an ice age and made music. Not to hunt, not to survive, for the sound of it. And it might reach back even further. There's a piece of a cave bear's thigh bone found in Slovenia with holes punched through it that some scientists believe is a Neanderthal flute, maybe 60,000 years old. Others argue those holes were made by the teeth of a hyena. That fight is still going on right now, but think about what is even being argued here. We are seriously debating whether Neanderthals, the ones everyone wrote off as brutes, were making music before we were. Some researchers push it further still and argue that before we had language, we had song, that our ancestors were humming, keeping rhythm, and talking to each other in melody long before words showed up. A whole species carrying a tune before it could carry a sentence. And where there's rhythm, there's dancing. Look at the rock art painted across southern Africa by the ancestors of the Sand People, and you find human figures caught mid-motion, arms thrown out, bodies bent, clearly dancing, some of it tied to ritual and trance, and some of it, researchers now argue, done for the plain joy of moving together. People have been losing themselves in a dance for as long as we can see them at all. Here's where it gets personal, because fun is not only what you do, it's how you show yourself off. Go back around 75,000 years to a cave on the coast of South Africa called Blombos. In the dirt, archaeologists found tiny sea snail shells. Nothing unusual until you notice the holes. Every shell pierced in the same spot, each one worn smooth from rubbing against a string. These were beads, a necklace. 75,000 years ago, someone strung shells together and wore them because they liked how it looked. In that same cave, on a small piece of stone, there's a pattern, a deliberate crosshatch design scratched into red ochre. It's about 73,000 years old, and it is the oldest known drawing on Earth. Somebody made that, not a map, not a tally of the hunt, a design, because they wanted to make something exist that wasn't there before. And they wore color. Ancient humans ground red ochre into pigment and painted their skin, their bodies, their belongings. They cared how they looked. Vanity, if you want to call it that, is tens of thousands of years old. Then there's the carving. In another German cave, someone took a mammoth tusk and, over what experts estimate was hundreds of hours of careful work, carved a creature with the body of a man and the head of a lion. We call it the Lion Man, around 40,000 years old. There is no practical reason for it to exist. It doesn't feed anyone, it doesn't kill anything. Someone spent months of their short life sculpting a being that only lived in their head. That is imagination made solid. That is a story you can hold in your hands. And now the part that gets me every time. Deep in the caves of France, where the famous paintings are, researchers started paying attention to the handprints on the walls. Ancient people would press a hand flat against the rock and blow pigment around it, leaving a stencil behind. And when scientists measured those hands, a lot of them were small. Really small, as many as a quarter of them may have belonged to children. Go even deeper, into a cave called Rouffignac, and you find lines dragged through the soft clay of the ceiling and the walls. Finger tracings, and some of them were made by children as young as 3 years old, lifted up or carried into total darkness to run their fingers along the rock. Sit with that picture, a parent, tens of thousands of years ago, carrying a toddler by torchlight into the deepest part of a cave, just so the kid could drag their fingers through the mud and leave a mark on the wall. That is not survival. That is a family. That is play. That is the exact kind of thing you would do with your own child on a rainy afternoon. Some things about being human have not changed even a little. Once people started settling down, the fun got organized. Board games. In ancient Egypt, they played a game called Senet more than 5,000 years ago. Boards have been found tucked into tombs, including the tomb of King Tut, because they wanted something to play in the afterlife. In the ancient city of Ur, there is another board beautiful, inlaid with shell and deep blue stone, around 4,500 years old, and we have actually pieced the rules back together. People have been sitting across from each other, moving pieces, and talking trash for thousands of years. Toys. Archaeologists keep pulling them out of the ground. Spinning tops, dolls with arms and legs that move. Tiny clay animals, little carts on wheels. Children in the ancient Indus Valley had toy ox carts thousands of years ago. Kids have always had toys because kids have always been kids. And then there's sport, and this one is wild. In ancient Mexico, people invented a ball game, and to play it, they first had to invent something the rest of the world hadn't. Rubber. They worked out how to turn the sap of a tree into a solid bouncing ball more than 3,000 years ago, long before anyone else on the planet. Then they built giant stone courts to play in. More than 1,000 of them have been found. It was a game, it was a spectacle, and sometimes it was deadly serious, wrapped up in ritual and even sacrifice. But strip all of that away and the truth at the center is almost funny. Humans invented rubber because they wanted a ball that bounced. The Egyptians wrestled and painted hundreds of wrestling holds across a tomb wall like a fighting manual. They swam, they rowed, they played a stick and ball game that looks an awful lot like hockey. The urge to compete, to line up and prove what your body can do is ancient. Now let me tell you about the party that may have changed everything. For a long time, the story went like this. Humans learned to farm. Farming gave us extra food. Extra food gave us free time, and free time is what finally gave us art and ritual and celebration. Work first, fun as the reward. The dirt is telling a different story. In a cave in Israel, archaeologists found the chemical traces of beer, brewed by hunter-gatherers around 13,000 years ago before farming, in a place tied to burials and feasts. Some of the oldest alcohol we have ever found, made by people who had not planted a single field. And then there's Gobekli Tepe. On a hilltop in Turkey stands a ring of massive carved stone pillars, some of them taller than a person and covered in animal carvings. It is around 11,500 years old. That makes it older than farming, older than pottery, older than writing, thousands of years older than Stonehenge. And it was raised by hunter-gatherers who, as far as we can tell, did not even live there. They traveled to it, they gathered at it. And around those stones, researchers found the remains of enormous feasts and great troughs that may have held brewing beer. Think about what that means. Some of the first monumental architecture in human history was not a house, it was not a fort. It was a gathering place, a reason to travel, to come together, to eat too much, to drink, and to celebrate something bigger than any one person. And here's the twist that flips the whole story on its head. A number of scientists now argue it happened in the reverse order from everything we were taught, that the hunger to gather and feast and brew came first, and the sheer pressure of feeding all those people in one place, again and again, is part of what pushed humans to start farming at all. Beer before bread? The party before the plow? If that is true, then fun is not some prize we unlocked after building civilization. Fun may be one of the reasons we built it in the first place. But step out of the monuments for a second and back into ordinary life, because there is a myth worth killing here. The idea that ancient life was nothing but a grim, non-stop fight to survive, every waking hour spent scraping for the next meal. Anthropologists went and lived with modern hunter-gatherer peoples, groups whose way of life still echoes our deep past, and they timed it. And it turned out that getting enough food often took only a few hours a day, so what filled the rest of it? Resting, talking, visiting other camps, making things by hand, playing with the kids, telling stories. Some researchers called it the original affluent society. Not because these people owned much, but because they had the one thing we are all starving for: time. And the best of it came out at night. Researchers compared what people talk about by day against what they talk about after dark. In the daylight, the talk is practical work plans, who did what. Complaints, the ordinary business of staying alive. But when the sun drops and everyone pulls in close around the fire, it changes completely at night. In the firelight, people tell stories. They sing. They talk about people who aren't there, about spirits, about the ones who came before them, about worlds beyond this one. Firelight turned plain talk into imagination. That's it. That is the oldest form of entertainment. There is a group of people around a fire, telling stories in the dark. We have been doing it for hundreds of thousands of years, and when you dim the lights, put on a show, and let a story pull you somewhere else for a couple of hours, you're doing the exact same thing your ancestors did. You have just traded the fire for a screen. And I'm not going to be polite about the rest of it, because the science isn't. Ancient humans got intoxicated on purpose. Beyond the beer, there is evidence of people burning cannabis in ritual settings thousands of years ago and breathing in the smoke. There are long-running arguments that our ancestors sought out mushrooms and plants that bent how they felt and what they saw. The chase for an altered state for a few hours out of your own head is not some modern weakness. It is one of the oldest habits our species has. They had sex for pleasure, not only for children. They groomed each other, sat close, touched, and stayed near one another the way our primate cousins still do today, because closeness feels good and always has. And they swam. There is a spot in the Sahara Desert, one of the driest places on Earth right now, where ancient people painted swimmers onto the rock, because thousands of years ago, that desert was green and running with water, and people jumped in and swam, and someone thought it was worth painting on a wall. A cave full of swimmers in the middle of the Sahara. None of this is tidy, none of it is polite, and all of it is instantly, achingly human. So what did ancient humans do for fun? They laughed with a laugh older than our whole species. They made music in Ice Age caves. They drew and carved and dressed up and hung shells around their necks. They carried their toddlers into the dark just to finger paint the walls. They played board games and invented rubber for a ball that bounced. They danced by firelight and told stories after sundown. They got drunk, got high, fell in love, and swam in a desert that used to be green. And they hauled stone into the sky and built one of the first great monuments on Earth for no better reason than to gather and celebrate. We did not invent fun. It was handed to us 16 million years ago by an ancestor who already knew how to laugh. Everything since has just been us finding new ways to do the oldest thing we know how to do. So the next time someone tells you to grow up, that fun is a waste of time, that it's frivolous, that it doesn't matter. Remember this. Fun might be the most human thing there is. It came before farming. It came before cities. It may be the very reason we have them. Your ancestors would not understand your job. They would not understand your phone, but the moment you laugh so hard you can't breathe, or lose yourself in a song, or stay up way too late telling stories in the dark, they would know exactly what you were doing. Because they did it too. And they have been waiting a very, very long time for you to remember.